all of our schools coming in. It's so nice to see you all. Welcome, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I know that we have a few schools here in Alberta, but I noticed a couple from the United States. We have a couple of our global schools, so not really sure how many of you are live on the Zoom because I think it's the middle of the night there, but when you watch this later, it's wonderful to see you. I just wanted to remind everyone to please, if you would like to, I noticed a couple of our schools have already put their school name for their display name. You're welcome to do that. You're welcome to put your location or your pronouns. So I'm Rebecca with the Center for Global Education. I use she, her pronouns. And welcome to Bye Bye Bullies. I'm so excited for our event today. I don't want to take a ton of time from our presenter, so I'm gonna jump right into it. So I like to begin all of our events with a land acknowledgement. So I acknowledge that I'm joining from Amiskwaciwâskahikan, and this is on Treaty 6 territory. It's colonially known as Edmonton, Alberta, but these lands have been traditional lands of many diverse groups for many years, including the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and the Nakota Sioux. And since we're joining on a virtual platform, I also would like to take a moment to acknowledge all of the traditional lands that you're joining from across Turtle Island and around the world. And in the spirit of reconciliation with Indigenous and diverse peoples across our country, we can today try to move our minds maybe from a place of judgment to a place of acceptance, but even farther, we can help foster a world where differences aren't just accepted, but amplified and cherished in our communities. So much like the environment surrounding our Two-Spirit predecessors who have walked these lands for time immemorial, I want us all to take a moment to center our minds around that idea of amplifying marginalized voices as we hear some personal stories from our presenter today on the importance of this in our schools, in our communities, in our country, and around the world. Just to give you a little bit of a lowdown of how the event is going to look today, we have our guest presenter, and then after she's done with her presentation, we're going to have a Mentimeter quiz. So if you have a device available with you, make sure you have it ready because I will have a QR code for you to scan. I'll also put some text so you can do it on your computer as well. It'd be great when we get that quiz up if you could get as many of your students to answer it as possible. Now, I know a lot of us are elementary schools, so if you don't have a device available, your teacher can answer for you as a group, but kind of the more answers we get in there, the better. So just keep that in mind. If you need to go grab a device, now's the time to do so. As well, at the end, we will have some time for a Q&A. So it's great to take some time to maybe write down a couple questions that you have throughout the presentation, and then you can pop those into the chat and we'll get to them during our Q&A session at the end. Now, I would like to welcome our guest presenter. Ray Madge, she, they, is a Decho Dene, Cree Métis, and mixed settler Two-Spirit person who works as the program coordinator for Where the Rivers Meet at the Firefly Institute for Gender and Sexual Diversity. Her role at Firefly includes educating students, teachers, and organizations through workshops and events, helping to cultivate expansive views of gender and sexuality free of colonial, patriarchal, and otherwise restrictive perspectives. So Ray, I'm going to pass it over to you now. You can go ahead and share your screen, and thanks again so much for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for that beautiful intro. I'm so psyched to be here today. Just going to make sure my presentation is all up and beautiful. So hello, folks. Welcome to today. So as was already said, my name is Ray Madge. My pronouns are she, they. And what that means is that you can use pronouns like she, her, hers to refer to me, or you can use they, them pronouns. So as was already mentioned, I am Indigenous. So I'm from northern British Columbia, and my ancestors are from even farther north in the Northwest Territories. And actually in the map that Rebecca just showed with all of the different regions, I saw Decho Dene there, which is so cool. So I'm super excited to be here. Yeah. I'm a Two-Spirit person, so this means that I am both Indigenous and I'm part of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. And I'll tell you more about what that means in a bit, but for now, just know that that Two-Spirit identity means that I'm Indigenous and I'm queer. So I'm an educator, so I teach students and teachers all about the experience of being Indigenous and queer, the struggle of being queer, the experience, all of those sort of things. So I'm going to share with you today a little bit of my story of coming into my queer Indigenous identity and it's just some kind of advice I have on how to be a really good ally to queer folks. So I hope that sounds good for you all today. So this is me when I was little. I know, I'm super cute. So how did I know that I was part of the queer community? Well, I have very early memories of having crushes on people of all different genders. In elementary school and junior high, I liked a lot of different people. But I grew up in church. So I was surrounded by teachings that told me that it was wrong to be gay, that it wasn't God's best for me to be queer. I was reading some of my old journals from when I was in elementary school, and I'm writing about experiencing these gay feelings, and I'm like, oh, stupid hormones. That's all that this is. And so this is what I grew up thinking, is that it wasn't okay that these feelings would pass, or maybe it was okay that I was gay, but if I acted on it, if I dated or kissed or married a girl, then I would be disobeying God. So I tried to pretend it didn't exist. I tried to hide it. I only dated boys. I decided that I would marry a man and never have to tell anyone that I had crushes on girls. That was really, really hard on me. Pretending to be something that I wasn't felt like I was lying to the people around me. And I thought that I would never be able to come out, that I would always have to keep it a secret. That was really hard. But then when I was in grade 8, a little bit older than y'all, I heard the word bisexual for the first time. And I immediately knew that that word described my experiences really, really well. I felt an attraction to genders that were the same as me and genders that were different. And I realized that I wasn't broken or wrong for having those feelings. A lot of people felt like that. So eventually, I worked up the courage to tell a couple of my friends in school that I was bisexual. But they were really weirded out by it. They told me that they didn't want to have sleepovers with me anymore. And they also told me that they were worried that I would try to kiss them. But that's not what I was saying at all. I just wanted to share with them who I was. I just wanted to be honest with them about how I felt. What I learned through that experience was that my friends didn't understand this. If I wanted to be friends with girls, they couldn't know that I was bi. So around high school is also when I started reconnecting to my Indigenous heritage. So I always knew that I was Indigenous. I always knew that, but I didn't grow up in the culture. So this is me and my grandpa when I was little. He's my connection to the Dene and Cree Métis people. He's my mom's dad. So my mom is Indigenous and my dad is a settler. And I had kind of thought that I didn't look Indigenous enough. I didn't grow up in the culture, so I wasn't really Indigenous. But then I started to realize that that idea of being Indigenous enough didn't really make a lot of sense. And so in high school, I really started digging into these roots. I started learning about smudging, about plant medicines, about the teachings of the land, and about what happened to my people. So I learned about colonization and how the settlers and founders of Canada worked really hard to get rid of Indigenous people's ways of being. So I learned that before colonizations, before Europeans ever set foot on this land, there were 2S LGBTQIA plus Indigenous people. And in fact, there are so many words in Indigenous languages for queer identities. There's words that translate to meaning not man, not woman. So maybe like a gender non-binary type of person. There's words in Indigenous languages that call trans women goddesses. Inuit people have words that mean lesbian and gay. So I learned that not only did these people exist on these lands, but they were included, they were accepted. I learned that these people who were Indigenous and queer held really special roles. They were leaders and medicine people. They were midwives. They would be adoptive parents if there were children that didn't have parents. They were also mediators. So if the men and the women were having disagreements, if they were having just fights or conflicts, the queer Indigenous people, the two-spirit people, could go in between and could mediate, could help them reach a resolution. So they weren't just accepted by their people, they were celebrated for the unique role that they played in their communities. So in the modern era, we use the word two-spirit to describe those identities that are rooted in traditional ways of understanding gender and sexuality, to describe someone who is both Indigenous and part of the queer community. But what I also learned through this was that when Christians arrived here, they were afraid of those identities. When they came here, they saw women who were wearing men's clothes, they saw men wearing women's clothes, people in same gender relationships, and they saw people that they didn't know what gender they were. And that was confusing to them. They thought that it was wrong. They thought that it was sinful or against God to cross dress or to be gay or to express yourself beyond a binary. And so the Christian European settlers did everything they could to try to get rid of that diversity, to introduce ideas that said that it was wrong to be gay. And it was definitely wrong to be Indigenous. And so one of the ways that they did this is through residential schools. So if you don't know what residential schools are, these were government mandated schools that Indigenous children were forced to go to, and they were run by the Catholic Church. And this actually is a photo of my great-grandma Emily and her siblings outside of the school that they were forced to attend. So this is not a long ago history. That's my great-grandma. And the goal of these schools was to get rid of Indigenous culture. And so part of that included getting rid of these ideas that were inclusive to 2S LGBTQ plus people. So young ones in these schools had their hair cut. They had to wear the clothing that was given to them. They weren't allowed to speak their language or practice their culture. And so a lot of those original words for queer identities were lost. A lot of teachings of what it meant to be two-spirit were lost. Queer Indigenous people in these schools were punished for expressing themselves authentically. And they were specifically targeted in really violent ways. So people learned that in order to survive, they had to act straight. And like I said, we lost a lot of teachings of what it meant to be two-spirit. But what's really exciting is that now there is a huge movement of Indigenous people who are reclaiming those traditional perspectives. And that includes reclaiming being two-spirit.
Relatively new, two-spirit people have.
So I'm going to show you a video now. Sorry, I started a bit quick, talking a little bit more about what it means to be two-spirit.
Actually been around for centuries. So
I'm just going to start it over.
Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, gender non-conforming, and two-spirit. You probably haven't heard the last one, right? Well, two-spirit is a Native American term used to describe people who are believed to be blessed with both male and female spirits. And while the word itself is relatively new, two-spirit people have actually been around for centuries. So let us explain. For the hundreds of tribes who lived in what is now known as the United States, two-spirit people were individuals who took on both traditional female and male roles. For example, a two-spirit man might be both a weaver and a hunter, or a two-spirit woman might excel at crafting and combat. The tribe celebrated them not because of their gender identity, but for their range of skills. They were respected as healers, seers, and medicine people. They were considered lucky in finding love, and they could help others by matchmaking and creating love potions. Two-spirit people were often referred to in a third or fourth gender, but each tribe had their own interpretation and word for it. And while being two-spirit was more about the natural fluidity of gender roles than about sexual orientation, they did tend to have same-sex relationships. Two-spirit people were honored within their communities. They were celebrated, embraced, normalized. But ignorant European settlers not only treated them poorly, but they were also perplexed by their same-sex relationships. And not surprisingly, over time, American missionaries and government agents did all they could to stamp out these cultural practices among natives. They forced relocation and forced mandatory boarding schools to culturally assimilate into white society and required Christian conversion. So as you can imagine, two-spirit traditions began to fall by the wayside. Luckily, a small number of people were able to preserve them. Native American activists in the 1960s unearthed this tradition. And slowly, knowledge about Indigenous gender nonconforming people began to spread. So in the late 1980s, Native American activists began referring to queer members of their community with a new term, two-spirit. Because it was in English, the term united hundreds of Native tribes and communities under a language and culture they all knew and shared. And like other modern terms like LGBTQ, the term two-spirit emphasizes spiritual and historical heritage as opposed to the sexual and biological aspects of gender identity. Although two-spirit is in English, its origins are rooted in Indigenous language. The term became official at the 1990 Intertribal Native American Conference in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Today, while Two-Spirit people continue to deal with the effects of colonizers' attempts to wipe out Native culture, the term is being used by the Indigenous queer community to help them claim not just their gender identity, but their ethnic and spiritual heritage too. Every time you hear about the need to break away from the binary, every time you hear the need to fight for gender fluidity, do remember that it's a term that is not a new fight. It's actually a return to our roots.
I love this video so much. It's so, so good. So what I started to realize, learning all of these things, is that being queer and owning that identity is an act of reconciliation. It's an act that contradicts colonial ideas of what it means to be a gendered or sexual person. So some of my ancestors were queer. Queer people have always walked these lands, and we always will. Hard part is that Canada didn't want Two-Spirit people to exist. They tried to get rid of us. But here we are. And so undoing the harm of colonization and residential schools means undoing ideas like homophobia and transphobia. So decolonizing means accepting ourselves as we are without limiting binary perspectives. Decolonizing means loving ourselves and not trying to fit ourselves into boxes when we don't fit into them. So in my second year of college, I ended up coming out publicly to everyone. And this is the photo that I used to come out. I made a post on social media with this photo talking about how I wasn't ashamed of who I was. How if there was a God or a creator, they made me exactly who I'm supposed to be. And that denying who I truly am was only hurting me. After making that post, I was removed from the music team at church. I had played bass on the worship team for about 7 years, from the time I was 12 until I was 19. But I wasn't allowed to play music on stage or even be on stage after I came out. I was treated like a problem, like an outsider. And it didn't matter that I had poured years and years into the church. As soon as they knew I was queer, they dropped me. The people who I called family suddenly stopped talking to me. And so just like how Christianity was used to justify hurting Indigenous people through colonization, Christianity was also used to justify hurting and excluding me. And that was really hard. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just being true to myself. I was being true to what my heart and my mind and my body were telling me. But in the long run, it was worth losing that community to make room for a new community that loved me for who I actually am, not for something that I was pretending to be. So now, 5 years after coming out publicly, I am so happy to report that I am part of a really solid community and family who love and support me. I have a wonderful fiance who is also part of the queer community. His family, who are about to become my family, love and support my Two-Spirit identity. My mom has now come to realize that she's part of the community as well. And the friends around me now are almost all queer. My chosen family treats me better than my church family ever did. And I no longer go to church, but I find my spirituality through Indigenous ceremonies like smudging and sweat lodge. So one of these photos here on the right, this is a sweat lodge. So a couple of weeks ago, I did a sweat ceremony, which is going into this lodge with rocks and pouring water on it so it steams up. And I did a Two-Spirit sweat, which means every single person in that lodge was queer. And I witnessed Indigenous queer people who saw their place in the community in the circle and are there for each other. So now I find spirituality in that, or to my connection to the land, when I hike a mountain, or swim in a lake, or watch birds, or grow plants. And I am now professionally gay, as my job involves teaching others about the history of queerness, and how if we want to decolonize, we want to undo the negative impacts of colonization, then we also have to change how we see gender and sexuality. You know, this is a job that I never could have done if I had continued to hide who I was. So I have some advice for you all. First is that there's nothing wrong with you. You're not bad or broken or sinful for being who you are. And I encourage you to explore who you are as much as you can. try on different ways of expressing yourself, be that your name or your hairstyle or the clothes you wear, and realize that gender and sexuality are fluid. You can be more masculine one day or more feminine another day, and that's okay. You might identify with one label or gender now and a different one later, and that's also okay. You're figuring yourself out. What I will say is that you know yourself better than anyone else ever could. So trust yourself. Trust what feels right in your mind, your heart, and your body. So if wearing certain clothing or makeup or hair feels good to you, then do it. I also encourage you to find safe people you can talk to about exploring your identity. Your parents don't understand, look for another supportive adult who can be a safe place to talk about these things. A teacher or a coach, or maybe a friend's parent. And if you have friends or people around you who are experimenting with their expression, with their look or their style, their name or their pronouns, or if they come out to you as part of the 2S LGBTQ+ community, be supportive. Call them by their name, even if they change it a few times. Practice their new pronouns out loud by yourself to help you learn. And correct other people if they use the wrong pronoun for someone. Don't make fun of them for how they dress, even if it doesn't make sense to you. And don't assume that they want to date you just because you're gay, just because they're gay. Also trust that they know themselves better than you do. Be kind and encouraging. So if someone comes out to you saying things like, "Thank you for sharing that with me. What can I do to help you feel supported?" Or maybe it means asking them, "Is there anything I've done in the past that's made you feel unsafe or uncomfortable?" And also call other people out if they're being mean to someone for how they dress or act or express themselves. Stand up to bullies. Tell them they're being mean and it's not okay. And tell a trusted adult. Something I really want to note for all of you is that you don't have to understand every single thing about the 2S LGBTQ+ community in order to be respectful, kind, and a safe space for someone. So be curious, not judgmental. Be open-minded, not trying to put people in boxes. And I'll end by saying this. Your greatest gift to yourself and your community is being completely authentic to who you are. And you deserve people in your life who love you for who you actually are, not for something you're pretending to be. So I have a question slide, but I'll hand it back over to you, Rebecca. We're going to do the Mentimeter now. So I hope you enjoyed hearing my story a little bit. I'm so honored that you all listened, and I'm excited to hear your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I just need to say, as I'm the one who's brave enough to have my camera on today, I don't know about anybody else during their presentation, but I literally got goosebumps. That was so powerful and so moving. And your face when you shared the slide about coming out was just, it lit up so much. It was so beautiful to see. So I just had to say that first. Thank you so much. So I see some of our schools are already starting to put some questions in the chat. That's great. So you guys can start chatting with your students, see if you guys can come up with a few questions that you'd like our presenter to answer. And while you guys are coming up with those questions, I have a little Mentimeter quiz for you to do. So your options are either to go to menti.com and use this code, or if you have a cell phone in front of you, just go ahead and scan this QR code. I'll leave this slide up for a minute just to give everybody a second to get going on the Mentimeter while I ask you this question. While I share this statement. Muriel Martin has the statement that some of our friends are part of the community and they didn't even know about Two Spirit. So do you find that that's common when you do these kinds of presentations to schools?
Yeah, 100%. It's something that I think it gets missed in a lot of conversations about reconciliation, a lot of conversations about the queer community. It's only a recent thing to even put the 2S at the beginning of 2S LGBTQ+. That's only in the last few years that that's kind of been accepted. So lots of people don't know about this. I didn't know about this until I was in high school, and I've been Indigenous and queer pretty much my whole life. So yeah, it's a lot of things that people don't know about, which is why I'm so passionate about this work and sharing it.
Yeah, and that kind of is a little bit into that second question they're asking is, nowadays are you seeing people knowing about Two Spirit a little bit differently than maybe when you were a child?
Yeah, it was definitely unheard of when I was young. Like I think the first time I heard Two Spirit was when like Jason Mraz came out as Two Spirit, and he's
Uh-huh.
not Indigenous. And I remember just being like, oh, like that doesn't really make a lot of sense because I didn't understand what it actually meant. It felt like just like a kind of a weird thing. Um, but yeah, when I go into schools now, like a lot of people are very open to it, especially Indigenous youth. There's kind of this resurgence happening right now, and a lot of youth know a lot more than they did when I was young, which I'm so happy about.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Okay, before we get to the next question, I would like to draw everyone's attention to some of our responses that are coming in. So what comes to mind when you hear the word gender? And these are like great answers. I feel like these kids definitely have a GSA club at their school. Spectrum, non-binary, but political. So thoughts about gender being political or students thinking that it's political?
Yeah, I think that a lot of things when it comes to gender and sexuality have been like politicized and made into these like party issues, but I think it's a lot simpler than that. Even things like pronouns, like some people, if you even say the word pronoun, people are like, ah, like that's so controversial. But pronouns are part of grammar, right? We just use pronouns to represent someone's when we don't want to say their name 100 times. And so I think what's really interesting is people think these are such like hot button issues, and they kind of have become hot issues. But it's a lot simpler than that it has to be. Like it's a lot simpler than people make it out to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, that makes total sense. I just want to make sure I don't know. I do see a couple of our people are saying they're not able to submit their answers. I might have reset. You guys could try reloading the Mentimeter. We might get a couple more responses. And sorry, I don't know. I think it might have paused after our first couple answers. So if you want to try the Mentimeter again, maybe I'll just go back a couple. And you guys can try it a second time, see if it pops up there.
Mhm.
But again, while we're getting that going for a second time, I think we had another question here. Where should our class start to show support? Ooh, so first
Mhm.
steps.
Oh, first steps. I think the first thing, like kind of how I talked about, is just being kind to the people around you, right? Not making fun of people if they dress different than how you expect, not making fun of people if they sound different or if they change their name or anything like that. And I think it also can start with accepting yourself and realizing that you're, like I said, being authentic to who you are is your greatest gift to the community. And so being authentic to who you are, doing kind of that searching, that exploration, see who you are, and trusting that other people are doing that work too. And I would also say keep learning, right? There's so many resources online, even in like the packet that was sent out by CGE. There's lots of activities. I would say do that for sure. I would say like read books by Two Spirit authors, watch more videos by Two Spirit people, follow Two Spirit people on Instagram, to kind of put faces to this sort of thing. So I think yeah, learning lots, all of that sort of stuff. And then yeah, Rebecca, I see you put the Pride Guide in there. Do you want to chat about that?
Yeah, I was just saying, as you were saying, learn about things. I was like, I have a link. So yeah, our Pride Guide that we made with the government of Canada, was that one last year, 2 years ago? Actually, the picture at the start of this Mentimeter was from that Pride Guide project where we got GSA clubs across Canada together to share how do you make schools safer for queer youth. And all of that is in the Pride Guide. And actually, looking at your presentation, there was lots of overlaps of even just those quick and simple things that teachers can do in their classroom to make a student feel more safe. So yeah, feel free to click on that and read through it, made by students who are actually experiencing this. So it's a really, really great resource.
That's awesome.
Okay.
I think I also want to comment on in this Mentimeter, I'm seeing two options and I'm seeing more than two. So I just want to talk
Yeah.
about it for a second. So people have a perspective that there's only two kind of biological genders, right? People are like, you're male or you're female. But that's not actually true. Even biological gender is a spectrum. So there are people who are what's called intersex, which means that they have bodies that don't fit neatly into male or female. So they might have hormone levels or different body parts that don't kind of fit what you expect a man or a woman to look like. So even when it comes to biological gender, it's not just two options, it's a spectrum as well. So I just wanted to comment on that and say, we know that gender is a spectrum, we're trying to understand that. But I also want to say that our bodies themselves exist in so many different ways, and there's no wrong way to have a body.
Totally. Yeah, that's a really great point. And I find that's like one of the first kind of eye-opening things when students this age are learning about gender and sexuality, that it's not A or B. So totally fine to be A or B or nothing or both or anything in between.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this one is a little bit about learning about diverse queer identities, like including Two-Spirit. I know for me, I mean, I already love this stuff. I've done work on the Pride Guide in the past, but I learned a lot about Two-Spirit today. It's always been something that I guess since it's part of like the indigenous culture and I'm a white settler, I'm not a part of that culture. So I feel like learning from the outside, I get a little bit more about it every time I hear somebody share about it. So even just for myself, I learned a lot today. And just looking at the kids, it looks like we had a little bit of understanding of queer identities, but we learned a lot today. So that's awesome to see.
Oh, I see a great question in the chat about
Yes.
why is blue associated with boys and pink with girls. So this is so interesting. This is actually a recent thing because before about World War II, pink was associated as a very masculine, bold color and was associated with boys. And blue was considered like a softer kind of color and was associated with girls. But there was a switch that happened during World War II because gay men were represented with a pink triangle in order to be targeted by those sort of forces. And so it was after that that pink became associated with femininity. So this is an interesting point about how the ways we think about gender in this pink blue sort of boxes way is recent. It has switched across time. It has switched across cultures. And so what we get from that is that it isn't actually founded in anything like concrete. It's social, it's cultural, all of these sort of things.
Yeah, I like that's such a great example. And it makes me think too, even of like clothing that we think of as being gendered is such a new thing in the history of humans, of the clothing that we think of as boys' clothes or girls' clothes. Like they're all such new ideas that the fact that we're so tightly tied to them is kind of bizarre, honestly.
100%. I mean, you walk down a toy aisle in any sort of store, and it is shocking how clearly defined it is. Pink
Mm.
is dolls and dress up and all and animals, and blue is like Transformers and Nerf guns and all this sort of stuff. But it doesn't have to be that way, right? Like I grew up loving dinosaurs and cars and all of this
Mhm.
sort of stuff, all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And our next question actually is like very closely related to this poll. So I thought I would throw this one up here. Just asking about some of the things that we've heard from youth in the past are issues that pop up in their school. I picked kind of like the top 5 that I usually hear about. And you know, just to see how often do we see these things happening in schools. And of course, some of these are very concerning, like the use of queer slurs or the F word, incorrect use of pronouns, so teachers or fellow students ignoring someone's preferred pronoun. Those are kind of like more common. And it kind of leads me to this question from our grade 4 class. When people say gay slurs, how should we respond?
Yeah, 100%. I think, sorry, there's like a garbage truck. I hope you can't hear it.
I thought it was a dog.
No, it's a garbage truck. I think it's stopped now. Sorry. So I think it's as simple as in the moment, just going, that's not okay. How do you think a gay person would feel if they heard you using that slur? How would it make you feel if I used your name to describe something that was bad? That's something that I think you can tell people too. If people are like, oh, this is so gay, when they mean like lame or bad or anything like that, I think that's huge. And then if someone's saying it as a slur, like using the F slur or things like that, just being like, you're hurting people when you're saying that word. And even if you're not trying to hurt people, the impact of it matters more than your intent of what you were trying to do. And also, I encourage people that you have a better vocabulary than that. Use your words, use better descriptive words than these ones that are going to hurt people.
Mm-hmm. I like that idea of having someone imagine their name replacing that word that they're using to actually understand how that would feel to constantly be hearing it, even if it's just in small offhanded ways. If it's always there, it's just those microaggressions have such a big impact. I think that's really powerful. Okay, what do we have next on here? Ooh, order these from most to least commonly seen in your school. So this one, I picked some of the positive things that we've seen from some of our schools that have done stuff with us in the past. So Yeah, the most common that we see is the use of pronouns, which I agree. I do find it is becoming more commonplace today. To us LGBTQ inclusive images like flags and posters in the classroom, having safe spaces and inclusive bathrooms. And then kind of the lower ones that I think need a little bit more work would be queer models in lessons. So having an example of an author who's gay, or a scientist who's trans, like having just those like normalized people in our lessons. And then of course including queer focus in health or sex ed classes, which a lot of our schools joining now are just starting that kind of like health sex ed section of the curriculum. So yeah, I don't know, any of these that you have thoughts about?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me, like, not to critique your question, Rebecca, but the first one that says use of pronouns, I think this is again the thing that's kind of been politicized, but we use pronouns all the time. We do it all the time. I think respecting people's pronouns is something that is becoming more and more common, and I love that. And yeah, I love that people are seeing queer inclusive images like flags and posters. That's so, so great. Safe spaces, I love that. Yeah, the queer role models thing. I know for me, like some queer role models that I look up to in the Two-Spirit community, one of them is Billy Ray Belcourt, who's actually a University of Alberta alumni, and he's an amazing poet and has won like a $20,000 prize for his poetry. And he talks about the intersection of indigeneity and queerness, but also grief and love and things like that. So he's an awesome writer. As far as like artists, I really, really like Alona Burley, who is a Two-Spirit drag artist that competed on season 1 of Canada's Drag Race. And she is Two-Spirit. She's from BC, I believe. And for her like final regalia look on season 1 of Canada's Drag Race, or for her like final runway look, she wore regalia. So she wore like a jingle dress and a ribbon skirt, and just wore this like traditional Indigenous outfit on the main stage of Canada's Drag Race. So I feel like that's a huge role model for me as well. Yeah, I totally agree. And if you're not seeing these role models in your classes, again, follow them on social media, read their books, like have the agency to look and find these things if you're not getting them in your school.
I know it's kind of the wonderful part about having such a diverse online community now since COVID is like it's much easier, I think, for students to find that family outside of their family. And yes, I see Sarah saying as well, also loves her. Yes, totally amazing. This one says some of our kids say that their parents and grandparents are not as accepting as they are. And they don't know what to do about that. So I know you said your mother is such an ally now. Do you have advice for us talking to the older generations?
Yeah, I think be patient and don't take it personally. And what I will encourage you with is like I grew up with parents that were not accepting. I didn't touch on it a ton in my presentation, but when I came out as bisexual to them, I was in a relationship with a man, and so they were like, "Well, this doesn't matter until you aren't dating him anymore." So that wasn't super great. And I remember growing up, my parents being like, "Well, I can understand gay people, but bisexual people are just confused," or things like that. I'm reading through some of my older journals right now, and one of them is like, my dad told me he's sick of my political agenda today. And so that's who I was. Like, I was someone who was always bringing up these things, always advocating for the community as an ally first. And it took years. It took a really long time. But now my parents are, yeah, my mom is part of the community. My dad has like inclusive pride flags all over. Like on his motorcycle, he has like an inclusive pride flag. So I would say be patient. Don't take it personally. And keep trying to open up these ideas. Keep trying to have these conversations in a way that's non-judgmental, but just kind of educational, if that makes sense. And don't give up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, change is scary and hard for all humans. And like I do think like the youth nowadays that are coming up through school, this stuff all seems so normal and accepting to you. But yes, it is hard to put yourself in the headspace of something new is scary. So yes, your grandparents and your parents do get afraid of things sometimes. So it might take a little bit of extra work, but yeah, keep trying hard. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I was just gonna leave this last screen up here for a minute while you were speaking, just to kind of, remind us all. You did talk about a few things that we can do. The Pride Guide has a few things that we can do as well, but I would say, from what I've been hearing from you, the biggest thing is just like be accepting of other people and accepting of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And there's lots of concrete things. Like, I think the biggest thing is like respecting people's names and pronouns seems so simple. Um, and I'll give you a slight trigger warning here, but it is literal suicide prevention.
Yeah.
There's studies that show that people who are gender nonconforming or who are trans, there's some studies that say that almost half of sample populations have at least one lifetime suicide attempt, which is really hard. But we also know that in like those same demographics, when they have at least one supportive adult in their life who calls them by their name and their pronouns, that number jumps down dramatically. And so it's literal suicide prevention. It's literal mental health care to call people by their name and to call people by their pronouns and to respect that they know themselves better than you do.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And I do think sometimes too, with the recent stuff that we've been seeing in the news about, especially here in Alberta, but across Canada and really around the world, of this pushback against supporting queer youth in schools, I do think that it is important to think, we're not just maybe like supporting an agenda, but we're actually saving children's lives when we do these things. So
Precisely, yeah.
might be slightly difficult, to use a new word for someone, but a lot more difficult than dealing with the loss of a loved one.
100%. And if I can say one other thing is like people have this perspective now in some circles that exposure to queer ideas is going to make them gay. And that's just simply not true. Conversion therapy has been banned in Canada because we all understand, all of the experts agree that you cannot convince someone who's queer to not be queer. And so in the same vein, you can't convince someone who's not queer that they are. So we know this, right? The only result of having queer inclusive education, of having stories like this that students have access to, is that they might feel seen. They might understand themselves a little bit faster than some of the rest of us did. And it's a benefit to every single person in a class when they're educated about these things. Because when we have a culture of accepting and celebrating each other, rather than trying to fit people into boxes, every single person benefits.
Really. And I it's so well wrapped up. I was gonna say, do you have any last thoughts? But I feel like that was like a perfect end to that Q&A section. So I wanted to thank you so much for all of your great answers, and classes for all of your great questions. I think that was a wonderful discussion. Before I do my final goodbye, I do have a couple reminders I wanted to give everyone. We have a great upcoming event called Trashing Against Fast Fashion. A bit of a pivot from this, but the cool thing about this is we actually are partnering with one of our schools in the Philippines who did a trash and show event. So it's a really great way to have that intersection of culture and diversity and environment kind of all in one big event. So it's a super great event. If you're interested, please visit CGE to sign up for it. And if anybody in the meeting today is not yet on our newsletter, please scan the QR code now. We do lots of events like this. We usually do a couple events focusing on the LGBTQ community every year. So if you have a GSA club and you want to get more involved in stuff like this, scan our newsletter. This is how you get involved with those things. And of course, I wanted to say thank you so much. Thank you to all of our schools that are here and participating, in all of those schools who are going to be watching this later on YouTube. And biggest thank you, of course, thank you so much to our speaker, Ray. You've been absolutely amazing. I know it takes a lot of bravery to share such a personal story live online. So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing, and all of the amazing words and wisdom that you shared with us today.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you. Awesome. Okay, well, that's it that we have from us. Everybody, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, evening, or morning, depending on where you're joining us from. And yeah, go out there and support queer kids. Okay, bye-bye. Awesome. Let me just get us all. Some of us take a little bit to hop into the waiting room. Awesome. See ya. Hey, I think that's it. Awesome. I'm recording. Oh, beautiful, wonderful. Oh my gosh, that was so beautiful. Honestly, so beautiful. I was not joking. I literally had chills.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I care very deeply about this work, and I'm so thankful that you invited me to do this, and to have the opportunity to speak to so many schools all at once is just really, really awesome. So
thanks again so much. It looks like everyone was really into it. Oh, I have to stop our live stream.
Oh,
I was just so into it. We had our thank yous.